I'm sure by now you can tell that I'm obsessed with red versus blue, and as a person who's obsessed with red versus blue, sometimes I look at somewhat non-canon red versus blue content and try to see if there's a way to make it canon, such as some of the alternate endings from Season 5. For example, the Jenkins alternate ending where Church wakes up and finds out everything was a dream and he wasn't actually killed by the tank. I think maybe that could be possible that that's part of the time loop, where Jenkins was sent to the base to make sure Church wasn't killed by the tank because, of course, he's there, but Church wasn't killed by the tank. And then when they all get shot up by the Reds, that's when Gamma sends Church to try to fix the situation, hence why Church accidentally causes his own death with the tank, and why Sheila goes to be renamed Phyllis and then renamed Sheila. As far as Jenkins being sent to Blood Gulch, we do know from Season 14 that he was on the accidental roster for backup soldiers that would be sent to Blood Gulch, so he's at least canon in some way. Another example is the alternate ending of Season 5 with the aliens attacking. That alternate ending could be created by the Wyoming time loop, one of the outcomes that the Reds and Blues don't see because it's an alternate timeline. And then I also like to take that and say that that ultimately results in RVB Animated, the animated version of RVB that was released on the Season 6 DVD. And then we see in Season 14, they actually took RVB Animated and made it canon, but as an event inside the memory unit in Season 9. Which I think both could still be canon, like one of them's an alternate timeline because of the Wyoming time loop, and then Church accidentally recreates those events in the memory unit, trying to get Tex to stay in Blood Gulch. So they're both canon in a way. And I know the point of the Season 9 memory unit story was to show us mirrored versions of events from the RVB show, except with a little different twist. And because it's a memory unit, if Season 9 and possibly Room 0 are showing us events in the main timeline or alternate timeline, how does that apply to MIA and Where There's a Will, There's a Wall, the two miniseries in Season 9 about the memory unit that were unrelated to the main story? If it's in the memory unit and Church isn't reliving memories in those episodes, how does that apply? And another miniseries that has an unknown location in the timeline is RVB 360, where you can interact with the episodes by looking around the entire environment with the mouse. And I think I've figured out how I can fit all these things into canon, and not be too much of a stretch. The one RVB 360 episode that is easily made canon is the episode The Talk, where Tucker's trying to give Junior the sex talk. That could easily have happened at one point during Season 5, in between the different scenes before, the Great Holy Valley thing happens, where Wyoming and Omega try to steal Junior. The only issue with that is Caboose is wearing the wrong helmet. The episodes, though, that I would mainly like to explain are A Day at the Base, The Flag, MIA, Where There's a Will, There's a Wall, and Supply Drop. I think all those episodes go here, in the gap of time between the bomb blowing up on Sidewinder and the Reds and Blues waking up in the desert. As I explained in my time travel videos, what I think happened there was, when the bomb blew up, it damaged the time distortion unit, causing the Reds and Blues to reverse their death from the explosion, but then be stuck in a warp where they viewed time so fast, they thought it was an instant, but really they were just living their lives regularly. Other than the fact that the Councilor in Season 7 said the Reds and Blues were relocated to the desert to investigate a mysterious energy reading, this is why I think that. First is A Day at the Base and The Flag. In those episodes, the bases they're at look like the Season 2 base, which is in Halo 1, but the armor they have is very much like Halo 2, Halo 3, which is in Season 4 and on. So I think when they got sent back to Blood Gulch after surviving the bomb, they got new armor and were just sent back to Blood Gulch. And you might say, how can this be in that time period? Caboose has a picture of Epsilon on the wall in that scene. It's not Epsilon, it's actually the AI in his head, Yellow Church. But this is where supply drop comes in. Now usually when the Reds and Blues get supplies, they don't get it all at the same time. They talk about each other getting supplies because they see ships showing up to the opposite bases, like when they got the tank and the rookies. But in this, they're collectively getting supplies from a dropship, which they jokingly said they shot down. It could have been coming to them anyway, but they may have shot it down thinking it was an enemy ship because they're morons. But in that episode, they have a helicopter that Caboose and Donut are flying around. And they have a new recruit. In that episode, the new recruit ultimately gets killed when Caboose and Donut crash the helicopter on him. And we never get to, know who that new recruit is. But there is the fact that in the memory unit, we get some sort of answer. In Season 9, they mention a soldier that died that was on Blue Team.
Private Andersmith.
Andersmith?
Oh, Mr. Andersmith!
Maybe Church and Tucker improvised that name in Season 9 because subconsciously the memory unit knew he actually existed. Because we do see Andersmith's name on the roster with Jenkins in Season 14. So maybe Andersmith was sent to the base before they were sent to the desert, and Caboose crashed it on him and killed him. This is where there's a will, there's a wall comes in. Or at least partially. While the Blues are staring at their helicopter that they got in Where There's a Will, There's a Wall, each of them are imagining something that they would do with a helicopter. Church imagines he would leave Blood Gulch forever. Tucker imagines impressing a bunch of female soldiers. And Caboose just imagines that he'd crash it. Is it possible that Caboose imagining him crashing it is actually what he remembers happened? And then the story of how it actually crashed in Where There's a Will, There's a Wall is a fake memory he told Epsilon to cover up for his guilt of killing Andersmith?
I told them Caboose did it. Apparently they already have a shortcut on their keyboard for reporting his team kills. Control-F-U.
The next episode I want to speak about is MIA, because the main story of that is the Reds can't find Griff. And so, while they go in search of him, they ask the Blues for their help, and in return, the Blues get all of their supplies. And in the process, they end up going to the city and meeting up with Tucker's informant guy. An informant guy he could have acquired due to the fact that right before the bomb went off, he had just learned that red and blue were the same. And so he was looking into it. And ultimately, they find out that Griff and Donut were just at the mall. At one point in those episodes, they run into the red and blue grunts. The only other time that they've met them, and they actually reference, they're like, oh, it's these guys. So it could have been quite recent that they had seen them before. Maybe they were sent back to their base after those events on Sidewinder as well. There's also the fact that the Reds called Doc for help at one point, and Doc says, it's weird hearing from you guys. And that could be because right before the bomb went off, Doc was possessed by O'Malley, the villain. But the thing that gets me is, at the end of the episode, when the Reds and Blues finally get back to their base, the Blues get all the Reds' supplies, and their base is overflowing. Meaning they probably need a bigger base now. Now, originally when the Reds and Blues got back to Blood Gulch in Season 4, they thought that Sheila rebuilt the bases, and that's why they're much bigger. But there's actually an explanation for this in the episode Get Bent in Season 14, which is in the memory unit. When Church goes in the memory unit, he finds out that the Reds are gender bent, so they're a bunch of female soldiers instead of male soldiers. And their base is huge on the inside, and they said all they had to do was call command and get it updated. So, because they needed more room in the base for stealing the Reds' gear, they tried to call command and have their base rebuilt. And because the Reds can't have anything less than the Blues, they did the same thing. And hey, there's also the possibility that the reason they were gender bent in Get Bent was because Caboose remembering that that's what happened in the time loop when no one else remembered what happened there. Could be because he had an AI in his head that was based off of a gender bent character, and so in that memory everyone else was gender bent. Yellow Church. You might ask, if Church is in these episodes, how can my theory be accurate? Because I've said before, when the bomb goes off, Church gets sent forward into the future to stop the windmill from being blown up. So how's he with the Reds and Blues in the gap of time? The temporal. This might be a cop-out answer, but maybe he gets distorted just like the rest of the Reds and Blues, and Lopez. And then once they all snap out of the time warp, Church then gets teleported to the moment where he has to stop the windmill from blowing up. This just moves the moment that he got teleported forward in time. While their bases are being rebuilt, that could be when they're reassigned to the desert to investigate the mysterious energy reading. The other bit of Where There's a Will, There's a Wall is the story about Sarge trying to figure out what's on the other side of this mysterious wall at their base. And he builds a ramp for Griff to drive a Warthog through the wall. And the Warthog obviously doesn't go through and it explodes. That's where Caboose's story of Simmons and Lopez crashing the helicopter into it factors into there being a hole in the wall. It's possible, and this could be the most stretchy part of my theory, that the whole concept of the Warthog flying into the wall and being destroyed could be an answer to why there's a destroyed Warthog in the desert when the Reds and Blues wake up. It's possible while they're in the desert, they're trying to figure out what's on the other side of a wall. Maybe that wall that's around the dig site in Season 7. And when they crash into the wall, it destroys the Warthog. Thus, that's why there's a destroyed Warthog when they wake up. There's also the fact that Councilor describes the base in the desert as a reward base. He never says it, but we see it on his screen. And maybe that could be due to the fact that because the Reds and Blues learned that the Reds and Blues were all the same, the Councilor used it as an excuse like, oh, you've accomplished your mission by finding out that the Reds and Blues were all the same. Here is a reward base. But also sending them on the mission in return for rebuilding their Blood Gulch bases. So ultimately, my theory is that MIA, the real version of it, not the memory unit version of it, supply drop, day at the base, and the flag all happen within the gap of time between the bomb blowing up on Sidewinder and them waking up in the desert. A time period I'll probably call the temporal, because that's what Sarge calls it when him and the Reds and Blues are spinning around in that white and black spiral with all the clocks when the bomb blows up in Season 3. Which, by the way, I think that scene actually does happen canonically, but it's the Reds and Blues having a vision of them going to the future because, like I've connected several times in the past, the time distortion unit is connected to the Temple of Vision on Chorus because it shows the future. The Red and Blue grunts become cultists because they see visions after dying so much. Or how Doc went insane in the future cube just like the Red and Blue grunts did. Or how Wash saw a vision in the future cubes because the cubes are connected to the Temple of Vision. The Reds and Blues saw a vision of going to the future because they were stuck in the temporal. And then so the overall concept of where there's a will, there's a wall. The helicopter part of the story is Caboose's fake story to deny the fact that he killed Andersmith. And the car part of the story is the Reds trying to get through the wall at the dig site, because it's implied that the dig site in Season 7 and the desert in Season 4 are the same location. I have a few honorable mentions of events that could have happened in the actual Red vs. Blue timeline that may have been hinted at in the memory unit. I think the fact that Tex actually ends up shooting Lopez and showing that that's how he became just a head could be actually how he became a head in Season 4. He wasn't destroyed by the bomb. You know, he was distorted just like everyone else. Maybe he was guarding the base with O'Malley. Tex, who was already up on the wall, shot him, destroying his body, making him just a head. And then she hid behind a column. And that's why O'Malley's looking around, making sure no one's watching him. Because he saw someone shoot Lopez, and now he's keeping an eye open. And of course, there's a sniper rifle on the ground next to Tex in that scene. So it wouldn't be that convoluted idea I came up with where the weather machine merged with the time machine and created a portal and sent Lopez to the future and only left his head in the future. Tex shot him, and that's why he's just a head in the sand. On the subject of events that happen after the Reds and Blues wake up in the desert, Andy the Bomb. Just like we get somewhat of a solution as to how Lopez was a head in the sand, we get a little more backstory on how Andy can talk in Season 9. One more detail of something that just happens to connect to them waking up in the desert. In Season 10, we get even more backstory on Andy, but it's like, if you blink, you'll miss it. That and the fact that at one point Sarge actually uses a digger, which shows up out of nowhere. And the fact that they're investigating an energy reading in Season 9, which, as we know, is the earthquakes created by the memory unit being jostled. We know that when they were sent to the desert, they were sent there to investigate mysterious energy readings. I can understand if this theory is kind of a stretch, but I think it's undeniable that that spot in RVB Season 3 is a little questionable. The fact that we don't see what happens between those moments, and just saying, oh, it's a simulation, doesn't cover enough. And what better place in RVB to show what happened in a gap of time than a memory unit? RVB definitely has its moments of subtle, secretive writing, and I think that's a perfect example.